We're going to move on to 1121. Mr. Vice Chair. Who is our member?
Rogers.
Well, we do have our member. Zach.
Mr. Chair and members, Senate Bill 1121 prohibits the National Guard of Arizona from being released into active duty combat unless the United States Congress has passed an official declaration of war or taken another appropriate official constitutional action. The bill requires the governor to take all actions necessary to comply with the requirements of this act. And finally, the bill defines active duty and declaration of war. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Zach? Senator Rogers.
Mr. Chair, members, and those in the audience, it's my honor to bring Defend the Guard back to the Arizona Senate. This passed the Senate last year. We were the first state in the United States to pass this bill through one chamber at least. This year, we need to get it through both chambers and to the governor, because as all of you know, we just lost 3 Army Guard members in Jordan. And Arizona Guard members were also casualties. I'm also honored to let you know that every single one of my caucus members, every single Republican this year, co-sponsored this bill. It is high time we pass this and keep our guard where it should be unless the United States Congress declares war. And with that, I stand for questions.
Any questions? Thank you. Mr. Vice Chair.
We have Ryan Boyd wishing to speak.
Mr. Chair, briefly. For the record, Ryan Boyd, on behalf of the Department of Emergency and Military Affairs, signed in neutral with concerns, but I would suggest that my comments would probably be duplicative. I was fortunate enough to bring Brigadier General Conley here from the National Guard. Would you mind if I defer to him to
General.
testify?
General Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, distinguished body. I'm General John Conley, Brigadier General John Conley of the Arizona National Guard. I'm the Director of Administrative Services for the Arizona National Guard. I apologize if I have to peek around the corner to see you there, Senator. First of all, let me say thank you for your support of the military, to all of you. We truly appreciate it. And we also appreciate the concern over the Arizona National Guard. I, too, am concerned about the Arizona National Guard. And I know this bill comes from a good place. I know it comes from a good place in people's hearts to want to protect the Arizona National Guard. But my concern with this bill is it will be the beginning of the end of the Arizona National Guard. If this bill passes, it will be sending a signal to the active duty and to the Department of Defense that the Arizona National Guard is unwilling and unable to go overseas and perform overseas missions. If that happens, then the President of the United States or the Secretary of Defense will cut off the federal funding to the National Guard. That's 97% of our budget. The President will also take our force structure. That's every helicopter, every KC-135 aircraft you see over there on Sky Harbor Airport, every fighter jet, every truck, every piece of equipment that we have comes from the federal government. Once we lose that force structure, then we lose the soldiers and the airmen, 8,000 of them, gone. We're either not going to be able to pay them because we won't have the funding from the federal government, or they'll quit because they're not going to want to be a toothless constabulary force that does not have a federal mission. If we lose those soldiers and those airmen and that equipment, it makes the state of Arizona less safe, because we can no longer use those helicopters to fly up and down the border and assist our law enforcement partners with that security mission. We can no longer pull people out of fires and floods. We can no longer use our heavy engineering equipment to mitigate disasters in this state. All of that goes away. And it's not whether it will happen, it's when it will happen. It's binary. Once we say we can't perform the mission or we won't perform the mission, then the president has no recourse but to take that force structure away from us. In addition, this law will be unenforceable. I just heard the senator mention that we've lost 3 troops in Jordan, and we've had many Arizona troops injured. If this law had passed a year ago, it would not have prevented that. This is an unenforceable law that would do nothing to prevent what its intention is, and I know its intention comes from a good place, but what it will do is it will ensure that the force structure of the Arizona National Guard is taken away and given to somebody who will use it, either the active component or another state's National Guard. And I appreciate your time. I'm available for any questions you may have.
Thank you, General. Any questions? Yes. Mr. Majority Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. General, thanks for being here. I understand the position that you're in because you have to say and take a certain position. But you hit on something really important. The federal government chooses. And that's the problem that we're having, that we're frustrated and struggling with, is the choices the federal government makes. Just a couple years ago, we abandoned Afghanistan, and 13 service members, active duty service members, lost their lives because an administration chose the most unthinkable. And as a retired Marine, it breaks my heart, and I cry every day when I remember that. My son just retired from the Marine Corps. He had enough. I'm getting reports from active duty members that are going through training, and this wokeness has infiltrated their ranks so bad. I can't even go into the details because I would be exposing the command and that trooper, and I don't want to do that. But if the federal government chooses to disarm the state of Arizona, that's very telling. And that kind of tyranny should not be stood for, because that's exactly what's going on right now with this administration, and God forbid another administration. But we're putting our troops in harm's way with the federal government and leadership, for that matter, lack of leadership, that are leaving our troops vulnerable. I'm sorry, I just can't comprehend the lack of leadership and care and concern for our troops as I've seen the last couple of years. So that was a statement. I'm sorry, General, but I had to kind of respond to that. But just to kind of give you our point of view. Thank you. No disrespect, sir.
General.
Mr. Chair, if I may respond to
Absolutely.
Senator Burley. Senator, I appreciate your frustration. I appreciate your concern. Nobody wants to maintain state equities and maintain the balance of power between the federal government and the states than a guardsman. That's what we spend all of our time doing. I spent a lot of time back in D.C. Arguing these issues at the federal level, trying to maintain the state's equities, the governor's equities, so that we can ensure that we stop federal overreach. You and I are in lockstep on that. I'm in lockstep with you as well, Senator Rogers. But what I can tell you about this bill is, since 1933, with the passage of the National Guard Act in 1933, when I and every other Guard person takes our oath to join, we don't just join the Arizona National Guard, or you don't join the National Guard of the several states. You join your state guard, you simultaneously join the National Guard of the United States, which is a federal entity. And when you join that federal entity, it's no different than raising your hand and swearing to be an airman out of Luke Air Force Base or a soldier down at Fort Huachuca. You join both at the same time. They're two very distinct but overlapping entities. So when the president says, hey, I need these folks from the Arizona National Guard to go to Jordan or go to wherever, he's not mobilizing them as members of the Arizona National Guard. He's mobilizing them as members of the National Guard of the United States. So if this law passes, the governor doesn't get a swing into whether those troops leave the state, because they're leaving as Title 10 United States Code members of the National Guard of the United States, a federal entity. They are no different than the airmen at Luke Air Force Base. Just like the governor could not say to the commander of Luke Air Force Base, no, you're not sending any of these airmen overseas, the governor won't be able to say that with regard to these National Guard troops. And that's not just me saying it. The United States Supreme Court in 1990 in Perpich versus DOD, in a 9-0 decision, a unanimous decision, we don't get many of those from the U.S. Supreme Court, in a 9-0 decision said that that paradigm where a National Guardsman joins both the federal Army and Air Force and simultaneously the National Guard of their state is enforceable and upheld it. So if this bill passes, it won't accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, but what it will do is it will put at risk the force structure of the National Guard. And it's not a whether, as I said before, it's not a whether the president will take away our stuff. The president has no choice. Once we say that we won't make mission, once we say that we're not going to use that stuff for its intended purpose, which, right or wrong, is to go fight in operations other than war overseas or to do other missions overseas, once we say we won't do that, then the president has no choice than to take away our federal recognition because we're refusing to do the federal part of our job. And once the president takes away our federal recognition, which he can do under 32 U.S.C. 108 right now, doesn't need any help from the Congress to do that, already has that authority. Secretary of Defense can take it away under 32 U.S.C. 105 A8. Those laws exist already. Federal recognition is going. Once we say, Arizona raises its hand and says, we want to be first in the nation to say we're going to take a knee. That federal recognition goes away. Once that happens, the president and the Department of Defense can't send money to us, even if they wanted to. They can't let us keep the federal equipment. It would be a violation of the Anti-Deficiency Act, the Federal Anti-Deficiency Act. It would be a violation of the Federal Purpose Statute because Congress has given that equipment and that money to us for the purpose of using it to fight an overseas battle. So again, it's not theoretical that this is going to happen. This law that will not survive first contact with the U.S. District Court and will not prevent, under the circumstances that you're trying to make it prevent, it will not prevent any of our servicemen from going overseas, even if there's no declaration of war, will absolutely, positively cause us to lose our infrastructure and our money. And we won't. The state of Arizona won't be able to afford us. It costs $400 a day to put a guardsman on the border, on average. And I've heard this argument. Why are we doing missions overseas and when we've got stuff to do on the border? I understand that. You know, why can't we do both, right? The state of Arizona taxpayers are already paying for both, right? They're sending in their tax dollars mid-April every year to pay for that force structure for those helicopters that we fly up and down the border. They're paying their tax dollars to pay for those guardsmen. They're also paying for the security of the nation by using us as a deterrent effect so that we don't have to get to the point where we're in an all-out world war and millions of people are dying. If we lose that infrastructure and we lose the 8,000 guardsmen, not to mention the 8,000 folks, Arizonans are going to be out of a job, the 8,000 folks, a huge percentage of them who are only partway to their military pension, that's gone. That's evaporated. So you're taking away military pensions from families. You'd be taking away health care from families, Arizona families. All for a bill that is not going to accomplish what it's trying to accomplish. If we do that, we are walking into a trap, unknowingly, walking into a trap that the active component is waiting, wringing their hands, cannot wait to happen because they want the force structure. The Department of Defense budget is huge. It's almost $1 trillion, but it's still a budget. And other components, like the active Army, would love to have our helicopters. They would love to have our $600 million budget, right? We're in a pacing challenge right now with China. You need aircraft and you need ships to keep pace with China. Right now, you don't need a lot of soldiers to keep pace with China because we're not going to put millions of soldiers in China, right? You need ships and you need aircraft. They're expensive. That money's got to come from somewhere. It's eventually going to come out of the Army's budget. So what is the Army going to do? The Army's going to turn to the National Guard and say, we want your stuff. And if we're the first state to raise our hand and say, we don't want to be your partner in these overseas fights, they're going to say, that's great. You just said you don't need that stuff. We're going to take it.
Mr.
Thank
Chair?
you, General.
Yeah, point,
Mr. Chair?
To that point,
yes.
Senator.
General? May
To
I,
that
Gunny?
point, Mr. Borelli has a point. You going to relinquish a point?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Rogers.
General, thank you for coming to committee. I'm retired Air Force pilot. Senator Borelli is a retired Marine gunny. If they already own us, if the federal government already owns us, then what's the difference between passing this bill and having them maybe, as you say, yank our funding and then tell us to go to battle anyway? What's the difference? And to say to me, sir, that pensions will be lost and so forth, that to me is an emotional argument. This is a states' rights situation. And we as Arizona need to take the first step to recovering our rights of our own National Guard. And this is why you have 2 retired military members sitting up on this dais in legislative service after having been active duty, each of us, for 20 years or more. And so I must conclude by saying that your argument seems to, in a way, sort of support where we're coming from. Because if the federal government's going to pull out the rug from under the Guard and take it over anyway, that makes my case. That says that we, the state of Arizona, should have the oversight and the control of where we send the Guard. And until the United States Congress declares war, they should not be committed to a combat war zone. What say you, sir?
General.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, thank you. Senator, you and I, as I said, we're in lockstep about not wanting the federal government to take over state equities. Again, I fight that battle every day. And the federal government doesn't own us. The federal government owns the equipment that they give us, and the federal government pays a great lion's share of our salaries so that we will train to fight alongside the active component if the president asks us to do so. So they don't own us. At rest, the governor is still our commander-in-chief. At rest, the governor can still use us. And now, because we have that federal equipment, federal law allows the governor to use that federal equipment to help the people of Arizona. Well, my point, Senator, is that if we say that we're not going to be part of that team that you and Senator Borelli were on, and I used to be active duty as well, if we say that we're not going to be part of that team, then the federal government really has no reason to give us the money and the equipment. And then what are we left with, right? We're left with 8,000 soldiers and airmen who don't have planes and helicopters and any money to pay them. And they're going to quit. I mean, let's just be frank about that. They're not going to stay in the state militia if it's no longer the Arizona National Guard, if we lose our federal recognition. So
I would, Mr. Chair, I would counter that and not,
Senator.
Mr. Chair, General. I think that's a leap of assumption. There, if I may, just as a side mention, there are many military folks here who would give their right arm for this state and this country and actually not take pay. So I just want to interject that, if I may, Mr. Chair. Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chair, Senator,
General.
I'm one of them. I actually lose money doing this job. So I appreciate that and I understand that. But as I'm sure you remember from your days on active duty, you know, recruiting is always a challenge for us. And that's recruiting to a fully funded, fully equipped force. If we're recruiting to an underfunded or unfunded force with no equipment, that's going to be a real challenge. But the real concern here, Senator, is as I said previously, this bill will not stop the president from sending troops overseas. If you pass this bill today, and the president said tomorrow that he wanted some portion of the Arizona National Guard to go to Kuwait, there is nothing that this bill would do to stop that. And again, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. You know, I'm not going to debate whether it's right or wrong that we're going overseas. I'm just saying that this bill isn't going to affect that. And if what we're trying to do is wrest power away from the federal government, then giving it back all of the equipment and giving it back all of the money, which gives us Arizonans, it gives the governor a seat at the table in national defense discussions. I've been there. I've been there at that table supporting the past governor. There's an entity called the Council of Governors, 5 red governors, 5 blue governors, all appointed by the president. They sit in 3 or 4 year terms. And they get to participate in conferences on a regular basis with senior level White House officials and senior level members of the Department of Defense and provide their input into the national defense strategy and the domestic defense strategy. Arizona doesn't get a seat at that table if we no longer have a National Guard that is viable. If we no longer have a National Guard that is federally recognized, we lose a seat at the table. So that's something that we lose. The governors have a very powerful voice right now, especially collectively. And the adjutants general, all 54 adjutants general, when they sign a letter from all 54 adjutants general saying, this is nonsense, federal government, we need you to do better, we think you're overstepping your bounds. I have not seen one fail, and I have seen many. We lose that power, we lose that authority if our adjutant general is no longer federally recognized, if she's defanged. And I can't stress this enough. The loss of federal recognition is gonna come. It's not theoretical. It's gonna come. And I know this is all coming from a good place, and we're trying to do the same thing. We're trying to make sure we protect our troops, and we're trying to make sure that we protect the equities of the state of Arizona and maintain the balance of power with the federal government. I'm with you, 100%. This isn't gonna do it. It's gonna have the opposite effect.
Thank you, General. We have 3 more to come up, and I think we're going to the same point. That's why I'm interrupting now. So I just want to continue to move on. Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you.
And
To
then,
that point, General,
Senator Burke.
we talk about mission. So if our guard is on a humanitarian or border security guard, and the federal government says, hey, I need your entire guard, you mean to tell me the governor says, I'm sorry, I'm already committed, I have a humanitarian crisis going on the border, I have border security issues right here, I've got them all deployed, and even logistically, they're already committed to this state, and the governor refuses the federal government? You mean to tell me they can just override the governor?
General?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, yeah.
Yes,
Senator,
sir.
as we sit right now, yes, and since 1933.
Well, but even if a state
Yes,
of emergency is not,
Senator?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, sorry, Mr. Chair, General, and even if a state of emergency has not been declared, and we're gonna just deploy our troops to a combat situation that even Congress hasn't even blessed as a national security issue?
Hey, General?
Mr. Chair, Senator Borelli, yes, the short answer is yes.
Yes.
You made our point.
Senator Birch?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and General Conley, thank you for being here today. Something, when I am talking to people in my district about their priorities and what's important to them, I have matters of border security coming up again and again and again. Can you please tell me what operations at the border looks like, how that changes if we do lose our federally funded equipment?
General?
Mr. Chair, absolutely, Senator. If we lose our federal funding and we lose our federal equipment, then we would be down at the border without anything. No weapons, no trucks to get us around, no helicopters to fly up and down, and if, God forbid, somebody gets hurt down there, pluck them and medevac them out of there. We wouldn't have any of that. And the state of Arizona would not be able to buy those things. They're just too prohibitively expensive. Plus, it's $400 on average a day. You know, it's an average because depending on what your rank is and how long you've been in the changes, but it's about $400 a day per guardsman. That's if we have a hotel to put them in. If we got to build out a tent city, it's astronomically more expensive. So if you want 5,000 of us, right? Let's say there's 8,000 of us. You want 5,000 of us down there. We'll make the math easy. If $400 a day times 365 days a year, that's $750 million a year to put us down there with no equipment, zero equipment. I don't think citizens of Arizona can afford that, especially since they've already paid for that in their federal taxes. Now I would have to go back to them and say, hey, I know that you already paid for this service to equip these folks, but we're going to ask you to dig into your pocket a second time and pay the state to go buy that same equipment that we just gave up because we passed this bill. I just don't think that's in the best interest of the folks in Arizona.
Thank you, General.
That answers my question. Thank you.
You good? And out in the audience, let's refrain from any hand gestures or remarks. I mean, we're in a committee here, and we have to make sure that we're all kosher with each other, right? Polite and nice, because I can be nice and I can be mean too, but I don't want to be mean. All right, thank you. Thank you, General. Any other questions? Thank you, General.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Vice Chair.
Mr. Chairman, we have Nathan Madden.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I just want to say first off, I am in support of the bill. I thank Senator Rogers and I thank the other co-sponsors of the bill. This is a necessary piece of legislation. I do think that this is probably the most important legislation in the country at this time. We cannot keep sending our guardsmen overseas. Congress is supposed to declare war for the national military before sending them over. And we're sending our state troops. It makes no sense. There's no justification for this. That's all I want to say. Is there any questions?
Any questions? No, thank you. Mr. Vice Chair.
Jacob Chansley.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, I'd just like to start by saying that after listening to the General, it sounds to me like Arizona and all the states in the country are in an abusive relationship with the federal government, similar to a spouse holding jewelry or a car or money over their head and saying, if you leave me, you won't get any of this anymore. You're going to be out on your own, out on the streets. That's kind of what it sounds like to me. It sounds kind of like the states have Stockholm syndrome a little bit here, and we're a state with amnesia. We seem to be forgetting the abuses of tyranny and the way that the state governments and the federal government have been tied together is largely antithetical to the Constitution and our founding documents. The fact of the matter is, the states are supposed to be sovereign. Our states are supposed to have their rights, and the federal government expansion through the bureaucracy and the military-industrial complexes basically circumvented the Constitution through the creation of national emergencies. And there is one at the border right now. And the fact of the matter is, the federal government isn't doing anything with the helicopters or the tanks or the trucks that they have given us. So if they're not going to do anything with any of the things that they've given us to protect our southern border from a very real invasion, then I think that it would only make sense that we withdraw from this abusive relationship. I think it would only make sense that we allow the government to know that we are sovereign and we will not stand for tyranny. That being said, I am in full support of this bill, and I thank all those that proposed it and see what it is that I see. Thank you. Any questions?
You have any questions? Thank you, sir.
Alan Skilcorn. Don't see Alan. Mr. Chairman, that's the end of our speakers.
All right. Do you need to say anything else? All right. All right. Move a bill for me, please.
Mr. Chairman, I move Senate Bill 1121 with the due pass recommendation.
Members, you heard that motion, Madam Secretary.
I would like to explain my vote.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see a lot of legislation come through this body that supports an ideology or just a school of thought, and that appears to be functionally making a point, but in practical application could potentially cause harm to our state. And I really do appreciate the testimony of General Connolly today, and really was compelled by that. I know how important matters of border security are to this state and to the people in my district, and I cannot put forth a vote that that acts against those interests, and so I am a no.
No.
No. Mr. Chair, may I explain my vote?
Yes, ma'am.
The general said that our intentions are good, and he said that it was important that we do what's right. And all I want to say is that is our job to do what's right, not avoid a veto, not worry about how it will play out in court, but to do what's right. And I stand here with my state of Arizona to be the first state in the country to do what is right. And then when we lead, other states will follow. And with that, I vote an emphatic aye.
Mr. Chairman, I explain my vote.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, we should look east a little bit, 2 states over. Texas stood up against the Biden administration, and they did not disband or federalize their guard. But I'm going to grab this rule book here and kind of look this up here on the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. I'll emphasize state. The federal government wants to step in and wipe out our guard and do that. They're really, really tipping their hand on how much tyranny and how much overreach they're going to have. And I disagree. If we're already committed to humanitarian missions and border security missions, we're talking about not deploying our troops in a combat situation. Combat situation. This is what we're trying to prevent. If there's not a national security state of national security or state of emergency, we shouldn't be deploying our troops into a combat situation. And therefore, we need to maintain that sovereignty of the Guard, yes. But I don't think the federal government's going to come down and just rip our stuff out. Besides that, we already have, I was in the Marines for 20 years. I was on a lot of humanitarian missions. And matter of fact, I was even involved in border security missions back in the mid-90s. Operation Gatekeeper. We built the fence along the San Ysidro border using old airstrip matting from that was obsolete, that was sitting at Port Hueneme. And that was all done with Marine Corps assets and personnel. And that was all done under a training budget. So we can do a lot of things, even if the federal government wants to cut us off. The governor has the power to use a training budget to put our troops down there or for our border security issues, because we can always conduct training. And we're exempt on a lot of EPA stuff. For that, I vote aye.
Aye.
Aye. Members, 4 ayes, 3 noes, 0 not vote, and you've given Senate Bill 1121 a do pass recommendation.